Myra Kostecki presents Somnium, The Dream, a podcast devoted to science fiction ideas and science fiction fact.
Hello everyone, this is Myra Kostecki. Very happy that you're all with me tonight from atop the Summit building in London, England. On a clear night with the crescent moon to the southeast, which I dare say would delight Mr. Kepler, the author of the work that titles this program. A little housekeeping here before we get to tonight's guest. Last week we inadvertently quoted in Asimov's 3 laws of robotics. The third law as a robot can protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first and second laws. Thank you to a trusted UK listener for demonstrating how one word can change the entire meaning of something so important. Asimov's third law does not, nor has it ever used the word can protect. It is must protect, which would render the third law as a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first and second laws. My apologies to the late Dr. Asimov, and to our guest who is patiently waiting to be on the program, Robert P. Fitton is author of numerous science fiction books and short stories, including time travel novels, the Harry Cobb series, which places an investigator into the inner solar system, Cron Man, Mega Human Guy, and Fitton's epic 4-volume Sojourn novel, Tom Loftus's long, adventurous journey eventually across the galaxy and space-time, and John Ross in Galactic Command. Finally, Robert, thank you for joining me on Somnium this evening.
Thanks, Myra, for the opportunity to talk about sci-fi.
Were you a fan of Dr. Asimov, Robert?
Yes, I first learned about Dr. Asimov from my grandfather, who would share his Science Digest magazines with me. There'd be an inked checkmark for each article he read, and he was in his 80s at the time. In Asimov's almost monthly explanations of science would be the first thing that I would read. I was and still am in awe of the man, especially his writing output, over 500 books and short stories, written or edited. I got to attend a lecture by Asimov at UMass Amherst in the 1970s, which I tape recorded. Besides his predictions and application of science, I sense a real concern for humanity. Everything else was impressive, but that stood out.
I understand you took an accredited course on science fiction at UMass. Why?
Well, let's roll back the clock, time travel, if you will. The older I get, the more I can time travel back, at least with the recordings, right?
Of course. That's a neat way to look at it.
Everyone is always amazed how I was blown away by the original Star Trek. We're in 1966 now.
Let me ask you this. Would you travel back to 1966 if you could?
Sure, but I would stipulate that I must come back to the present, to use Asimov's word must. I didn't know about Star Trek until 9 episodes had passed. I watched the Corbomite maneuver on November 10th, 1966. The concept of warp drive and Starfleet command in the 23rd century, wow. So I experienced a plethora of science fiction concepts during the Star Trek series.
Back to your UMass course, Mr. Robert. Did that course influence science fiction in your early work?
I wanted a deeper perspective on what I already knew. Books by Larry Niven, Heinlein, Asimov himself, a short story subway named Mobius fascinated me. I learned about Dyson spheres and elevators into space.
By the way, when did you start writing? Did you always want to write?
I began writing about 4 years later.
Did the course you took automatically find itself into that early writing?
Well, everyone always wants to write. I'm no exception, but I found in school with an assignment on the American Indian myth that I could write, and I had a great support system once I did write. That course prompted me to use my imagination. I had always loved the concept of traveling through time and history in general. In the red light district, I had them moving nuclear weapons within dimensional space, creating a bit of a problem. I used time displacement, specifically Einstein's theory of relativity in A Noble Experiment, the next book. Also, the transfer of human memories through DNA.
I like that concept. Can you imagine?
With what's going on in the completion of the Human Genome Project and the ability to duplicate genetic sequences, who knows? It certainly was the most intriguing thing I had written at the time. On that book was my first alien race, the Mergendorf, little fuzzy extraterrestrials versus the powerful elders of Varane, and an antimatter type chain reaction that ended the world. So sorry. In XB-234, now the Ramdamaz Kingdom, a NASA spaceship goes astray through a crack in the universe. Time is displaced, and later there is time travel back to Nazi Germany. That time travel is at the expense of everyone alive outside the time ship. A tough decision to make things right.
That novel was eventually written in California, according to the Fitton Books website.
I went out there to get a better sales job, which I did, and wrote a slew of short stories while I lived out there in the early 80s.
Tell us about the science fiction in some of those stories.
I'll refer to a few of the stories. No Place Like Home, a spooky scenario where a man finds himself back on November 22nd, 1963, the JFK assassination, but his fiancée later finds his grave in the present day with November 22nd, 1963 as the date of his death.
Sounds like a Twilight Zone episode.
No coincidence that Channel 5 in LA was running a Twilight Zone marathon just after I arrived. Now, Mr. Greenwald's Tiergarten is one of my favorites. Greenwald is in a virtual reality because he's made a deal with this guy named Jackson to become anything he wants. But he has trouble convincing those in the real world as to where he really is.
How much is enough, right?
Ah, that's the question, Myra. And then, how does Greenwald survive? Answer is just like anyone. We must, and there's that word again, we must survive in our own reality. But can Greenwald survive? Next short story written in LA. Fast forward, fall of 1982. Hold on to the remote because here we go.
Let's go.
Okay, a professor invents a remote to slide forward and backward in time. Not too complicated, but a rogue colleague gains control over the remote as he gains ultimate power at a great cost.
Hold on. Does he destroy himself?
Yeah. Next, thinking of you.
Who's thinking of whom?
Yeah, who's on first?
Exactly.
Who controls the freighter Practicon?
I keep thinking of Abbott and Costello.
I can get around that. Exactly who controls the freighter Practicon? The Hubric artificial life intelligence or the humans?
Creepy. In dead space.
Yes, and what is real and what is merely the desire of the Hubric? Who will live and who will die? The beauty of altering this reality is that it's very hard to know what's real and what isn't, and that's scary as hell.
This next one, Robert shows a Twilight Zone theme of justice being served.
Rod Serling did that very well, but there's also the sci-fi idea like a subway named Mobius, where infinity steps in. It's called the monstrosity. Montessori is trapped in a never-ending reality warp where he keeps stepping into a new mall because he can't fathom the damage from his company's reckless approach to building malls, which indeed becomes hell.
In my image morphing into another human being.
This story still bothers me today, and it's not because of how I wrote it, because of the character Herbert Frederick, and how this innocent guy Nick Kluger simply becomes absorbed into Frederick's being. It's sickening in the strictest sense.
I'm not sure what that says about life. My God.
Sometimes a writer doesn't even know. Maybe with an outline, but if you're writing like a gunfighter shooting from the hip, in-depth understanding comes a lot later.
And that understanding is?
Not creepy, but something that happens everywhere every day when one person or group dominates over another person or group, absorbing the enslaved, so to speak, into the dominating group or person's point of view. The Fredericks thing is like a scary Twilight Zone, but his persecution of Kluger is like denying what I said about Jefferson's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Thank you. Let's travel into outer space in the decision.
Avak's goal is to become Proltor in charge of others in a ship. But he must make a final judgment that will either give him what he wants or cause his own death. And what tweaks a reader's judgment as well as Avak is the following question. Which is the reality of Avak's decision? The real reality?
If I can pick up on the sci-fi themes in your writing, the sci-fi is often directed at reality or a perception of it. Also, the sci-fi instrumentality leads not to a human but eternal justice.
Thank you, Mr. Spock.
I'll take that as a compliment. Before we get to Sojourn in your next round of work, let's finish this segment with Read Roy his rights. I thought it quite snarky in a good sense that the little girl in the story is named after Miranda from the 1966 Supreme Court decision protecting someone. under questioning from incriminating themselves by reading the accused his or her rights. But we're here for the science fiction take. The robot Roy has all the feelings and intelligence of a human being, right? That's a tough one because you get into morality, souls, and God.
You sure do. The colonists are on a 200-year voyage and Miranda's guardian, Roy, needs to be scrapped. It seems that only the young girl can empathize with the guardian's ability to feel and think. Will we ever be able to create such a robot? After recently listening to a long Michio Kaku interview, I'm convinced that we most certainly will create Roy. Miranda demands that Roy be saved because of his personal dignity. I'm saying that when we cross the line and meet the personal dignity of a creature, digital, robotic, or biological, we must be aware of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
I tend to agree but need more time to think about it.
Because asserting a being's rights is a new idea, it seems complicated. But that's only because it hasn't been accepted yet.
And that all started with the science fiction itself as the predicate. Earth People and Others will be back in the next segment when Robert P. Fitton will address his gargantuan novel Sojourn that he began contemplating along the Pacific Ocean in Southern California and completed on Cape Cod. I'm Myra Kostecki. We'll be right back.
Somnium with Myra Kostecki is a production of Fitton of the Words.